Hey, I got the message. We're good. We're live.
We are, I think, to your point,
We
you got
are.
the message. I have not yet seen it.
Okay.
I'm still obviously not. Oh, here it is. Okay, so I don't think anyone's joined yet. I would like to introduce you as always, Kelly, because we know most people watch these after the fact.
Mhm.
Not sure why people aren't watching us at 11:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, but
Middle of their workday. Yeah, that's so weird. They should take a break and come join us. Take an early lunch. Late,
so I, I
late
think
coffee.
I think today's going to be fun because we're going to talk about storytelling as it relates to recruiting and ultimately storytelling kind of in general as a meta skill, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, so this should be fun because of course, none of our conversations to date have been boring, but I do feel like this one's a bit more exciting than maybe some of the others we've talked about in the past. As always, I do have to go navigate to the right place to make sure that I can follow any comments. And again, if anybody has joined with us live, please feel free to drop your questions or comments into the LinkedIn feed here. That's where I'll be monitoring things. I've got Kelly Sanchez, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, on the call with me today. As always, bi-weekly conversation partner, though we skipped 2 weeks ago
Yeah.
for Slopes Summit. Actually, that's not true. I had an offsite that day, and then
Yeah.
Slopes followed, so it was just too much in that week for me to make it work. But yeah, I'm gonna go do that. Kelly, as always, please lead us off with our icebreaker.
Yeah, for sure.
All right,
And
cool.
just noting that it was your fault the last time. It wasn't me. You're always putting blame on me, and it wasn't this time.
No, that's important. That is important. You're right. I've had a pretty flawless track record to date. Of this time, obviously not. So well said. You're absolutely not right or not wrong about that. Freudian. All right, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get to the place I need to go.
Okay. So yes, so welcome people who join us on Wednesdays. As you know, we start with a warm-up question. And so, like Scotty mentioned, we're talking about storytelling. So we figured it would be fun to discuss one of our favorite recruiting stories that we've come across. And for me, like there's just so many that come to mind. And really, when I was taking more thought into it, what I really enjoy about recruiting is extending offers. Like that is the best part of the role, to extend the offer through Zoom or over the phone and hear the excitement on the other line, and them waiting for that call. And the ones that really stuck out to me were when hiring leaders interviewed candidates. They may not have been like 100% match. However, the hiring leader did see potential in them, and that certain characteristics are intangible, like, hey, I can coach and mentor this person, develop them to become amazing in whatever role that they were applying for, and have them be successful. So those are the ones that come to mind for me. And being able to see that individual then thrive in that role too, hitting goals and being promoted. But if I remember a couple of the phone calls though, like extending the offer, like, oh my gosh, it's my birthday weekend, I'm gonna go celebrate.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, please go take some shots, go do your thing. Or it's like, I'm gonna go grab my son, I'm a single dad, gonna go get ice cream. So just so much is just shared in that like instant phone call of excitement. So for me, those are the recruiting stories that I really enjoy.
Well, and you'll I'm sure be humble in not mentioning that, we're talking for you, this is probably at this point hundreds, right?
Yeah.
Making that so you could pick any one specific example, but there's so many to choose from. So yeah, I love that. I think you're absolutely right. That those stories are the ones that kind of keep us doing what we do as recruiters who focus entirely on recruiting. I'm going to go a little different direction with the story I have to tell about about, one recruiting experience. There's also many to choose from. And so basically my story is, it was early in my career. I was working for a third-party recruiting company called Tech Systems. Kelly, you and I worked together over there. And I found a great candidate for a job that we were looking to fill. And everything was perfect except for one minor detail. When the account manager asked me for the individual's information, I told him the person's name, and it was a single name. And he and I had gone over this, me and the candidate. That was in fact real. Like, he just had one name. So I'll never forget telling our mutual friend Tony, what this person's name was, and Tony's like, "What? What? Just one name?" He's like, "What? Who is this guy? Cher?" Which dates us too, right? Like, there's plenty of other one name people to pick from now. I guess I could have said Prince too, but no, literally he said, "Who is this guy?" I think he is Cher. And the interesting thing is, it worked, social security number checked out. It was just had one name. So it was a unique experience for my, one of the earliest placements that I made. And again, one of many stories I could tell about recruiting, but that's not really why we're here today. We're going to talk about storytelling as it relates to the whole process of recruiting people into your organization. And certainly we're going to start at our level, at the recruiter level. Well, at my level, Kelly, let's be honest, you're several steps above my level. But
I'll take that seat.
But we are going to kind of talk about, how we use storytelling in this process in several different areas. And again, starting from a recruiting standpoint. So Kelly, we talk about this, you and I, we know this language, but what do you think is the importance of an employee value proposition, and how does that relate to telling a story?
Absolutely. So I would say storytelling allows for you to get into the details, kind of the behind the scenes of what is posted on the job description, and really hearing it from the recruiter or anyone from the company. Maybe you're posting videos, kind of a sneak peek of the company culture and mission. So absolutely, you're providing more details about the organization.
Yeah. So to your point, what we refer to as an employee value proposition, and the name implies here, but ultimately it all it is a story about why somebody would want to work for your organization. And it's critically important. That, again, may also be needless to say, but what's interesting is we find, for me personally, as a third party recruiter, I find some companies don't think about it and don't realize how important that story is to tell. For you, Kelly, working for DigiCert and heading up their talent acquisition, their global talent acquisition team, I know you have this nailed, because to your point, you guys do put out videos. You do have a robust, employer, a DigiCert page on LinkedIn. All of that goes into telling the story of what it's like to actually work for the company, to your point, outside of that actual job description. Mm-hmm. So that is the first kind of area we want to focus on in terms of telling a story, because without that, it's really tough to attract and ultimately retain the best people. Real quick, before we jump to the next part of this, I want to say thank you to everyone who's watching right now. Appreciate you being on. Kelly Sanchez, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. And of course, me, Scotty John, here on my LinkedIn page. Thanks for being here. We were talking about storytelling in recruiting specifically, and we're going to talk a little bit about it beyond that as well. With regard to, I think this is an interesting point moving on to the next part of this story. Oh, terrible story that we want to tell. But there's stories that get told based on the decisions that get made at companies, right? So whether a recruiter is telling you why you might want to work for the company, or for that matter, a hiring manager or a marketing department, if it's not consistent with what you're seeing, the company's decisions, like the public facing decisions being made, like, can you talk a little bit about that narrative and, how to do it right versus maybe how to do it wrong?
Right. So for this one, what comes to mind is we've all been seeing it, just companies with layoffs, some have been vocal about it, have gone ahead of it, communicating. Others maybe have not said anything. And there's no, I would say, right or wrong, because it is a hard subject to discuss. And let's get it. We've talked about layoffs before. They're not fun. I've been a part of it. Again, it's a rough time to go through. But the thing is, you want to get ahead of it and provide some type of communications, because that's when these non-stories and rumors happen, and definitely want to avoid that.
Yeah, I think that's that is the glaring kind of example. To your point, we're seeing it happen a lot right now. But like you mentioned, there are some companies who it's never easy to do, but doing it right is important. And there are some companies who do get out ahead of it. They communicate well, they communicate early and often with their internal people as well as publicly, because it does create a narrative. And so as recruiters, what we find ourselves doing often is helping people understand that narrative and telling additional stories and context for it. But again, some companies don't do themselves any favors whatsoever. And we're kind of playing from behind when we're talking to people like, hey, you guys just did layoffs a month ago. Why are you hiring? What is, you know what I mean? Am I going to be safe at the company if all these things are super important. And I think getting more and more important in the age of social media. So, I think layoffs are really important. I think the other thing to mention is, let's just say hypothetically that we've got a job that's being posted where someone's doing it today, right? That is another story that's being told or a narrative that's taking place, and there's a right way to do that, and then there's a wrong way. It's really important to get out in front of the narrative and help people understand what's happening. That's the story you want to be able to tell. Ultimately, the key here is being in control of the story you're telling as much as you possibly can. Anything you would add on that last one?
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely, I would say, what you can disclose, because I get it. Sometimes you cannot. But I think what's key, and that's something that we're already talking about, is getting ahead of it to provide you I wouldn't say control. So you have the control of the narrative before someone's making it up. And yeah.
Insofar as possible, right? Because in terms of, so again, brief pause here, just to mention for those of you watching, if you have questions for Kelly and I as it relates to this topic, we're talking about storytelling today. And because we're recruiters, we're talking about storytelling specifically as it relates to what we do. But it's a broader skill, and it's important in many different areas of business. So any questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the comment section, which I am monitoring here. Otherwise, we're going to move on to what can happen if the story does get outside of your control, right? So with regard to, again, thinking about the social media age and how marketing happens today, everybody wants to go viral, but for the right reasons. And stories that's the virality of stories is pretty obvious here on LinkedIn. Anybody who's watching this live on LinkedIn doubtless has heard of the crying CEO.
Mm-hmm.
That guy's story got out of his control by a long shot, and he was no longer able to kind of, tell how he felt, or some might argue that was a misstep to begin with. But again, the story was way bigger than what had happened, and now that guy, for better or worse, went viral, maybe not in the way that he would have wanted to, right? so virality of stories. I don't know, Kelly, I'm putting you on the spot here because I can't think of any here, but do you have any examples of positive stories that went viral?
I know. And I was trying to think. And for me, there isn't anything that comes to mind specifically, but the topic of storytelling. So I think about also companies that I admire and recognitions. That's also storytelling. Like they're winning a lot of recognitions. And so like a positive spin in a time where, let's say, this thing called COVID happened.
Oh, just that little thing.
That's the little thing. Flights. So airlines, that they took a huge hit and it was just awful for them. But Delta, this, I am a huge fan of them. I use my SkyMiles Amex all the time. But I was just looking them up and they've won so many different awards. And not only just for company, but also they've got the award for diversity for this year, healthcare benefits, the top airline. So there's multiple of awards and variety that they're winning. And so I think for them, their marketing is awesome because it's on their front page, it's positive news, especially and we're in a time where this D&I is something that is hot, trending topic for most companies and they're looking at it. But I don't know, and I can't speak of what they're doing specifically, but now I'm intrigued to look at that award and see what platforms are involved in communities and all of that as well. Because sometimes there are companies that say it, and guess what? They're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that example. And again, it goes back to they're doing a great job telling their story, right? So, and that's, again, a little outside of the talent acquisition aspect or recruiting aspect. But it does, again, it just drives home the point of how important this is, whether you're a company or an individual. And on that note, I want to move into how individuals can think about storytelling in terms of recruiting and also job seeking here in just a second. But I think it's important, the fact that I couldn't think of any positive stories, and you've brought up Delta as a good example of someone who's highlighting some things to help with their overall narrative. But we couldn't think of necessarily some positive stories. We talk about candidate experience. You and I, we've had that conversation here on this live, and certainly we've had it plenty of times offline, or IRL, as the kids are saying. But basically, negative. This is not going to be new to anybody who's listening right now, but negative news typically has more virality than positive. So when you think about a negative experience that happens during an interview process, once again, that creates a story that likely will get shared a lot, farther and wider than the positive stories, for better or worse. So as talent acquisition, as hiring managers, as companies, doing marketing, and certainly companies that are looking to hire, that's super critical to try to do your utmost to focus on candidate experience, because again, that just creates stories. That's a story creating machine. Anything you would add on that particular front, Kelly, specifically candidate experience?
No, nothing.
You agree?
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. You nailed it. So that's why I'm speechless for once,
Wow, I'm gonna have to what's the
you get a point for that one, Scotty.
Timestamp on this? That's never happened. So regarding individuals, now thinking about storytelling as it relates to individuals, again, I'll pause real quick and just say, for those of you watching, Kelly Sanchez, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, and I are talking about storytelling as it relates to a number of things, but primarily talent acquisition or recruiting. If you have questions for either of us, feel free to pop them into the comments, which I am monitoring. But transitioning a little bit to individuals and why storytelling matters from an individual perspective, I think I'll start with volunteering some information here regarding how I typically operate. It's become almost a trope or a cliche at my company now to talk about telling yourself stories, right? And I think that it's not just the stories we tell others, it's the stories we tell ourselves. And that's especially true when it comes to job seeking. So Kelly, I'm curious, like, how do you think about, first of all, that phrase, telling myself a story, telling ourselves stories? And second of all, what would you, we've talked about this as well, but what would you offer to some folks that are doing that right now as job seekers?
Yeah. So I would say, I think right now with the market, how it is, it's highly competitive. And you see a lot of companies out there, and to what we're saying, hey, they have a good marketing team. They're showing all the positive, because of course you want those employees to come work for your company. I would say just, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to correlate with like an example. So there's like a product or something that you buy or you want to buy maybe. So that you're wanting to maybe work at this company. What's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to reach out to someone you trust, buddy, friend, or something, and get the scoop. Hey, what's this product about? Does it work well? Does it not? The reviews say it does. I would think and hope the same thing right now is happening probably more than ever. With so many opportunities out there, people are, looking at the job board. This position looks great. Company website looks great. I need to know what's going on though inside. Are they really this company with a good culture or whatever the thing that you're questioning on? Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. To your point, the stories we tell ourselves, that can change a lot just simply by asking other people. And to your point, I think especially those, not everybody has the benefit of someone that they know working at a company they're interested in. But again, back to what we talked about earlier, we have more access to information now than we ever have before. And this platform, LinkedIn specifically, we are live on YouTube. Anybody watching on YouTube, I'm sorry that I neglect you so much. Someday I'll figure that part out. But generally speaking, LinkedIn is a great opportunity to validate or change the narratives that we have in mind with regard to companies. The other aspect of telling ourselves stories, I think that happens, from a job seeker's perspective is, oh, they haven't gotten back to me. I interviewed with them, last Monday. It's now Wednesday. I haven't heard back. They must not like me, or this is really, inconsiderate. I'm gonna write a strongly worded email to the recruiter. Right? I mean, I think we have to try. And the key here, in my mind, at least what's worked for me, not advice, just what's worked for me, has been to recognize that I'm telling myself a story first, and then try to just, check myself and ask others as well. If this seems reasonable, or if maybe I'm truly telling myself a story that isn't actually what's happening, right? That's a segue into how storytelling can affect or impact the interview process. I think about, really, when you think about interviewing, all it is a series of telling stories, right? So I don't know, any thoughts or advice for people, maybe not advice, but any thoughts on what works best for you, Kelly, when it comes to preparing for an interview and thinking specifically about how to tell stories? I have a couple thoughts, but want to pitch it to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about stories, like what's the best part of the story is you're engaging that individual, the emotions that come from that story, whatever that is, and then also like the close of it too. So if you think about it in the interview process, you're telling them a story, an example of something, like what did you do? How did it make you feel and impact, good or bad? A lot of times you want to hear all the good because that's what you're looking for. But guess what? You fail and you learn from that too, which, that was hard for me to learn when I was younger. And now it's like, I fail all the time and I'm like, oops, but hey, what did I learn from it?
Yeah, I think that frankly speaking, again, anecdotally and here on LinkedIn, I've seen this happen a lot where hiring managers will share some of the best answers they have ever gotten to questions they ask in interviews were people sharing some vulnerability and some failure and but what they learned and how they adjusted, moving forward. I think I'm going to be a little careful about highlighting failures. But again, generally, if you can tie that back in a story to what you learned and how you adjusted moving forward, I mean, that's a very powerful story. So I think that's great advice. And again, I think, we're you and I perhaps take some of the stuff for granted because we do it all day, every day. But
Mhm.
for those folks who, and I suspect all of us will, interview at least once or twice again in the future. Ryan, I hope you're not listening. I'm not interviewing you. Uh, but no, we'll all go through that process if people aren't actively going through it right now. Being prepared with the stories of where you've done what you've done, like how you've had successes. You know, I don't think that everybody's watched us enough to know that this is like a very common thing for me to say, but how have you either made or saved the company money is typically what hiring managers want to hear. And if you can tell that in the form of a story, and to your point, Kelly, especially an engaging one, that's a very great skill to bring with you to the interview. The flip side of that, that's obviously as a job seeker, is for a hiring manager. Hiring managers have their idea, right? The story that they know about their company and their team. How important is it, do you think, somewhat rhetorical, but how important is it that they try to at least have some understanding of what the story is on the outside, on the other side of that interview exchange? And how can they do that? Does that question make sense, Kelly? I feel like
I'm catching what you're saying. Yes, I would say very important. And we've talked about this too in past is these individuals you're interviewing, yeah, you're asking the questions, gaining experience, but you're also in the interview seat. They're interviewing you, the team at the company. So you better be prepared to share as well what's the good, the bad, the ugly, and be transparent to an extent of what you can share. But yeah, absolutely, I would say it's just as equally as important.
Yeah, and it's also, again, I think, for a hiring manager that's been with a company for a long time, they've got the internal story, how they think about it, but that's not necessarily going to be known to people on the outside of the organization. We all tend to do that. We all tend to take for granted some of the things we know. So to be able to your point, articulate the story that you, as the experience that you have as an individual working for the company, and if you're the person who the individual you're interviewing will be reporting to, you also want to be prepared to tell stories about what you think it's like to work for you, right? And probably point them in the direction of, don't take my word for it. You'll have an opportunity to meet with others on the team as well. Certainly you should ask them. We're getting close, Kelly, to wrapping this up today. So one more time, just want to say, for those of you watching, we appreciate you being on. Feel free, if you have questions or comments. I certainly hope I'm not missing them for some reason. I feel like I'm always concerned that that's the case, but if you do have any questions or comments about this topic, we're talking about storytelling, specifically as it relates to recruiting and job seeking. If you have any questions, let us know. Kelly Sanchez, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. You guys, it's a global organization. She leads their talent acquisition. No big deal. She's with me every other week for half an hour. I really appreciate the time, Kelly. I think we'll just wrap it up here with the fact is that storytelling is important, but being able to listen is super key. And I feel like, I don't know, the people I know that tell the best stories in my mind are also some of the best listeners. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly? Any final words on that and just this topic in general before we wrap, I don't know if we're going to get any questions here.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great topic, and it's honestly, storytelling is a really important skill set to have, Scotty, like you've mentioned. And it's also, I would say, a really important recruiting tool as well, because again, you're adding additional details, having that connection with the individual and sharing not only your story, but other individual stories. And every person has their own story and can connect in a different way too. So I know I personally enjoy it, and that's how I connect. So I'm a huge fan of storytelling.
Yeah, again, I think this is frankly, for me personally, it's something I haven't necessarily thought about as much, but I do. I think this is becoming more and more important for so many different reasons. And so, something to think through if you're in a recruiting position, if you're part of a hiring team, if you are looking for a job. So basically talking to just about everybody out there, right? And once upon a time, Kelly and I were little 20 somethings straight out of school or our first jobs, that were definitely not, the polished professionals that you see here today, and working together at a company that was trying to, not trying to, very successfully placing technical professionals in. And fast forward, I'm not going to say how many years, but like I said, Kelly, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. Thank you as always for being with me today and with us. Thank you for those of you who watched or tuned in for a minute. As always, if you have questions for Kelly or I, you can direct message us on LinkedIn, or you can just drop those questions into the comment section. We're always looking for good topic ideas. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, same place, same time, I believe. But I think that's it, Kelly. Anything else? You got the final word here.
No. Have a good day. Thanks for coming. And yeah, drop in the questions and comments. This is where we get our topics from. So thank you.